I never thought I'd be thanking the tiny red light on a recording device for saving my life's work. But sitting here now, in the office that almost wasn't mine anymore, I can still feel the chill that ran through me when I first heard their voices plotting against me. My husband Michael's smooth, practiced tone. Emma's condition is unfortunate, but it presents us with an opportunity we've been waiting for. My sister Sarah's eager agreement. She's always been too controlling with the recipes and quality standards. This is our chance to modernize. And my mother-in-law Barbara's cold certainty. The board meeting is scheduled for Thursday. Emma will still be heavily medicated. She'll never even know what happened until it's all done. I was supposed to be focusing on recovery. Instead, I was listening to my family carve up the company I'd built while I lay in a hospital bed with surgical staples still fresh in my chest. They say betrayal hurts most when it comes from those closest to you. But what they don't tell you is that betrayal can also awaken something dormant inside you. A quiet, calculating resolve that transforms vulnerability into your greatest weapon. They thought they were writing the end of my story. They had no idea it was just the beginning. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Most people remember the exact moment when they fell in love. I remember the exact moment I fell in love with baking. I was 7 years old, standing on a worn wooden stool in my grandmother's kitchen, flour dusting my cheeks and the tip of my nose. The rich scent of cinnamon and butter filled the air as my grandmother guided my small hands through the process of kneading dough. Baking isn't just about recipes, Emma, she told me, her voice warm as the oven beside us. It's about creating something that brings people together. That lesson stayed with me through culinary school, through my early apprenticeships at renowned bakeries across the country, and finally, when I met Michael Wilson at a food industry conference in Chicago. He was charming, business savvy, and seemed genuinely impressed by my passion for artisanal baking techniques. "You know what your recipes need?" he asked after tasting my signature sourdough. "A business plan." Within a year, we were married, and within 18 months, we opened the first Wilson family bakery in a modest storefront in Portland's Pearl District. The location wasn't ideal, tucked between a laundromat and a struggling bookstore, but the rent was within our tight budget. I handled all the baking, recipe development, staff training, and quality control, while Michael managed the finances, permits, and business strategy. We worked 16-hour days, sometimes sleeping on cots in the small office behind the kitchen, just to keep the dream alive. Our first breakthrough came when my blackberry bramble muffins were featured in Oregon Food Monthly. The lines formed around the block, and suddenly, our little bakery wasn't so little anymore. We expanded to a larger location, then added a second store across town. My sister Sarah, who had just completed her marketing degree, joined us to handle our growing public profile and social media presence. "We're becoming a real family business," Michael said proudly, kissing my flour-dusted cheek after we signed the lease on our third location. It felt like everything was falling perfectly into place. When Michael's parents, Barbara and George, retired from their hardware store business in Tacoma, they offered to invest some of their savings into our growing bakery chain. "We believe in what you're building," Barbara said, though her eyes lingered on Michael rather than me when she spoke. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too busy developing new recipes and training bakery managers to maintain our quality standards across all locations. That was the thing about our success. It was built on an unwavering commitment to quality. We never cut corners. We sourced locally whenever possible. We paid our staff well above industry standard. Our pastries and breads weren't the cheapest, but customers could taste the difference. "It's like you've captured what home should taste like," one elderly customer told me, clutching her paper bag of cinnamon rolls. Comments like that made the exhaustion worthwhile. By our 8th year, Wilson Family Bakeries had 15 locations across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Our headquarters occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in Portland, with a test kitchen where I spent most of my days perfecting new creations and adapting old recipes for larger-scale production without sacrificing quality. We employed over 200 people. Whole Foods and several other national chains were in talks to carry our packaged bread line. Michael had become the public face of the company, appearing on local business panels and giving interviews about entrepreneurial success. Sarah had built our social media following to impressive numbers, with our Instagram featuring mouthwatering, close-ups of flaky pastry layers and perfect breadcrumbs. I stayed mostly behind the scenes, more comfortable in a flour-dusted apron than a business suit, but industry insiders knew I was the heart and soul of our products. The Wilson touch, they called it, that indefinable quality that made our baked goods stand out from competitors. What they didn't know was that the Wilson touch belonged to Emma Henderson long before she became Emma Wilson. Looking back, I can see the subtle shifts that should have warned me. The board meetings where Barbara would question whether we needed to use such expensive butter in our croissants. The way Sarah would roll her eyes when I insisted on testing a recipe for the 20th time before releasing it. Michael's increasing impatience with my quality standards, which he had once championed but now described as bottlenecks in our expansion plans. "You work too hard," Michael would tell me, massaging my shoulders as I reviewed production reports. Late into the evening, "You need to learn to delegate more. Let others shoulder some of the responsibility." His words seemed caring, concerned for my well-being. I never suspected they were the groundwork for something else entirely. My body gave me warnings too, but I ignored those as well. The crushing fatigue that coffee couldn't touch. The occasional chest pain I attributed to anxiety. The shortness of breath while climbing the stairs to our test kitchen, which I blamed on simply getting older. I was 42 after all, and had been working non-stop for over a decade. "You need to see a doctor," urged Lena, our head baker, and one of my closest friends. "This isn't normal, Emma." I promised her I would, but kept pushing it off. There were new store openings to oversee, recipe adjustments for higher elevation in our Denver location plans, meetings with potential distributors who might finally take our products national. The company needed me. Or so I thought. The structure of our company had evolved as we grew. Initially, it was just Michael and me, equal partners in every sense. When we incorporated, we maintained that equality with each of us holding 50% of the shares. But as we expanded and needed additional capital and expertise, things changed. After Sarah joined and proved her marketing acumen, we restructured. Michael and I each held 30%, Sarah received 15%, and we allocated 20% to Barbara and George in exchange for their significant investment. The remaining 5% went to Jake Reynolds, our first employee who had started as a dishwasher and risen to become our operations manager. Jake was family and all but blood, the one who had stood beside me during those early morning baking sessions when we weren't sure if we'd make rent. "We need to formalize the board," Michael had suggested as we grew larger. "Make things more professional." So we did. Michael became chairman, I was CEO and head of product development. Sarah took the title of chief marketing officer, and Barbara joined as a board member representing her and George's interests. Jake rounded out our 5-person board, usually quiet but steadfastly supportive of my vision for the company. Our growth wasn't just about numbers and locations, though those were impressive enough. We had built something that impacted communities. Our bakeries became gathering places. We hired people who might otherwise have struggled to find employment. Former inmates through rehabilitation programs, refugees building new lives, young parents who needed flexible schedules. We donated day-old bread to local shelters and sponsored little league teams in neighborhoods where we operated. The food media took notice. Portland Monthly called our flagship store a temple to the art of genuine baking. Seattle Met featured our rustic country loaf on their cover with the headline, the bread that's changing everything. Our seasonal pumpkin cinnamon rolls had become so popular that customers would call weeks in advance to reserve them for Thanksgiving mornings. "Your grandmother would be so proud," my mother told me during one of her rare visits from Florida. She was right. Grandma Helen's spirit infused everything we did, from the way we folded butter into dough to the way we treated every customer with genuine warmth. Sarah and I used to spend Sunday evenings in the flagship store after closing, counting the week's receipts and planning upcoming promotions. During one such evening, as golden light streamed through the windows and the rich scent of the day's baking lingered in the air, Sarah looked around the bustling space that had once been nearly empty. "I never thought we'd get this big," she said. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "You've really made something special here, Em." Her words filled me with pride and a deep sense of connection. This was what family businesses were supposed to be. Shared dreams, mutual support, collective pride in creation. Looking back, that moment hurts the most in my memory because I believed her. I believed in her. The warmth in her eyes, the genuine smile, the sisterly squeeze of my hand. None of it seemed fabricated. That's the poison of betrayal. It only works when the foundation is built on trust. What I didn't know then was that Sarah had been meeting privately with Barbara for months. I didn't know that Michael had been growing increasingly frustrated with what he called my artisanal obsessions and quality bottlenecks. I didn't know that behind the scenes, alliances were shifting, resentments were festering, and plans were forming. I was too busy creating to notice I was being undermined, too focused on maintaining the soul of our company to see that others were eyeing its body. The warning signs were there, I suppose. The business magazines that interviewed Michael alone rather than both of us, as if the bakeries had been solely his vision. The way Barbara would purse her lips when I rejected cost-cutting, measures that would compromise our quality. The increasingly lengthy closed-door meetings between Michael, Sarah, and our distribution partners from which I was conspicuously absent. "They're just handling the business side," Michael assured me when I questioned him. "You don't enjoy those meetings anyway. It frees you up to do what you love, developing new recipes and maintaining our standards." His explanation made sense. I did hate the corporate aspects of our growing business. I was happiest in our test kitchen, hands deep in dough, measuring the perfect rise of a loaf, adjusting hydration levels for our signature sourdough to account for seasonal humidity changes. Why wouldn't I believe that my husband and sister were simply shielding me from the parts of the business that drained rather than energized me? Trust is such a strange thing. It allows you to excuse the small betrayals that might otherwise alert you to the larger ones forming on the horizon. Like a slow-acting poison, the erosion of loyalty happens in doses too small to detect until suddenly you're fighting for survival. And fighting for survival was exactly what I would soon be doing, in more ways than one. It happened on a Tuesday morning in late September. The air outside was crisp with early autumn, leaves beginning to turn golden on the trees lining our street. I was in our test kitchen working on a new maple pecan pastry for our fall menu when the pain hit. Not the dull ache I'd grown accustomed to ignoring, but a vice-like crushing in my chest that radiated down my left arm and up into my jaw. I remember the aluminum mixing bowl clattering to the floor, pear filling splattering across the industrial tiles. I remember Lena's face, eyes wide with panic as she caught me before I fell. I remember trying to tell her that I just needed a minute, that we had to finish testing the recipe before tomorrow's executive meeting. And then, mercifully, I remember nothing. I woke up in the cardiac intensive care unit at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital, a maze of wires and tubes, connecting me to softly beeping machines. Michael was there, his face drawn with what I interpreted as concern. Sarah sat in the corner of the room, tapping away at her phone, looking up periodically to give me a tight smile. Dr. Patel, a cardiologist with kind eyes and a direct manner, explained what had happened. What I had dismissed as stress and overwork had actually been symptoms of a congenital heart condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, exacerbated by years of ignoring my body's signals. I had suffered a significant cardiac event, and without immediate intervention, it could have been fatal. "You need open heart surgery," she explained, her voice gentle but leaving no room for debate. "And afterward, you need complete rest. No work, no stress, for at least 6 to 8 weeks. "That's impossible," I protested weakly. "We're in the middle of fall menu rollout. We have meetings with national distributors next week. I can't just—" "Emma," Dr. Patel interrupted, placing a hand on my arm. "This isn't optional. Without this surgery and proper recovery time, you could die. It's that simple." Reality crashed in as I looked at the serious faces around me. I had built a business from nothing, created jobs for hundreds of people, developed recipes that brought joy to thousands of customers. But none of that would matter if I wasn't alive. The surgery was scheduled for the following morning. That night, as nurses came and went checking my vitals and preparing me for the procedure, Michael sat beside my bed, holding my hand. He seemed distracted, checking his phone frequently, but I attributed it to stress and the need to manage the business in my absence. "The national distribution meetings," I said, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd briefly inserted after my collapse. "Make sure they understand about our quality requirements. No preservatives, no artificial ingredients. That's non-negotiable." "Don't worry about any of that," Michael said, squeezing my hand. "The business will be fine. Just focus on getting better." Sarah came in later, after Michael had gone home to shower and change. She sat at the edge of my bed, uncharacteristically quiet. "I'm scared," I admitted to her, something I would have been too proud to say to almost anyone else. "It's going to be okay," she said, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Everything will work out the way it's supposed to." There was something oddly formal about her tone, but I was too exhausted and frightened to analyze it. Looking back, I should have recognized that her words were carefully chosen. Not a lie exactly, but certainly not what I assumed she meant. The last thing I said to Michael before they wheeled me into the operating room the next morning was, "Take care of our baby while I'm gone." I meant the business, of course, the living, breathing entity we had created together that had become like a child to me. He nodded, squeezed my hand. "Don't worry about anything. Just focus on getting better." As they pushed me through the double doors, I caught a final glimpse of him already pulling out his phone, thumbs typing rapidly. I thought he was informing our team about my surgery. I had no idea he was setting something else entirely into motion. The surgery itself was successful, but recovery proved harder than anyone anticipated. My body, depleted from years of overwork and stress, struggled to heal. I developed a post-surgical infection that required additional procedures and powerful antibiotics. What should have been a 1-week hospital stay stretched into 3. During this time, I drifted in and out of awareness, heavily medicated and weak. Michael visited daily, but our conversations were brief and superficial. He assured me everything at the business was running smoothly and that I shouldn't worry. Sarah came less frequently, always seeming rushed and distracted. Only Jake visited consistently, sitting quietly beside my bed, sometimes reading aloud, from baking magazines or telling me funny stories about happenings at the bakeries. Unlike the others, he never rushed away or seemed impatient with my slow recovery. "The doctors say you're improving," he told me encouragingly during one visit. "But you need to be patient with yourself, Emma. The company won't fall apart if you take time to heal properly." I believed him about my recovery needs and about the company's stability in my absence. It wasn't until the beginning of my 3rd week in the hospital, when the stronger antibiotics were reduced and my mind began to clear from the fog of medication and infection, that I began to notice strange patterns. Michael and Sarah never visited together anymore. When I asked specific questions about the business, about our fall menu implementation, about the national distribution negotiations, their answers were vague and deflective. Barbara hadn't visited once, which seemed odd given that her son's wife had nearly died. Most concerning was when I asked Michael to bring my laptop so I could at least review some emails and stay somewhat connected to the business. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "Doctor's orders. No work stress, remember?" It seemed caring, protective even. But something in his expression, a flicker of something almost like panic, triggered a warning deep in my mind. That night, lying awake in my hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of monitors my only company, I realized that for the first time in over a decade, I had absolutely no idea what was happening in the company I had built. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my physical condition. I was completely vulnerable, physically weak, isolated from my business, dependent on others for information, and trustingly believing that those others had my best interests at heart. I had no idea that my vulnerability was being systematically exploited by the very people I trusted most. On the 23rd day of my hospital stay, Jake arrived outside of regular visiting hours. It was early evening. The hospital corridor quiet except for the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on the polished floor. He carried a small paper bag that contained a thermos of properly brewed Earl Grey tea, a welcome relief from the lukewarm hospital version served in styrofoam cups, and a single perfect croissant from our flagship store. His face told me something was wrong before he even sat down in the vinyl chair beside my bed. Jake had never been good at hiding his emotions. It was one of the things I valued most about him in a business world full of practiced smiles and strategic expressions. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, pouring tea into the cup he'd brought from home. A heavy ceramic mug from our first store opening, with our original logo glazed in blue. "Better," I said, accepting the tea gratefully. "Dr. Patel thinks I might be able to go home in a few days if my blood work continues improving." I studied his face, the tight lines around his eyes, the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze. "Jake, what's wrong?" He set his own tea down untouched, hands clasping and unclasping in his lap. "There's something you need to know, and I don't know how to tell you." The heart monitor beside my bed registered a slight increase in my pulse. "Just say it straight," I said, setting my own tea aside. "Whatever it is." He took a deep breath. "They had a board meeting yesterday. I wasn't told what it was about until I arrived." "A board meeting?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. We had quarterly board meetings, with special sessions only when something significant was happening. "About what?" Jake's shoulders slumped slightly. "They voted to restructure the company leadership. Michael's taking over as sole CEO. Sarah's becoming chief operating officer. He hesitated, then forced himself to meet my eyes. "They're moving you to an advisory role with no operational authority or decision-making power. They said it's temporary, just until you're fully recovered." The hospital room seemed to tilt slightly, my vision narrowing to Jake's face. "Who voted for this?" My voice emerged oddly calm, detached, as if I were inquiring about a minor recipe adjustment. "Michael, Sarah, Barbara, and George." He swallowed hard. I was the only no vote. I argued that this was something that should wait until you were out of the hospital at minimum, that you should be consulted. His voice faltered. "They said it was for your own good, and that involving you would only cause harmful stress during your recovery." The betrayal struck like a physical blow. My husband, my sister, my in-laws, the people I had trusted most in the world had waited until I was at my most vulnerable to take away the company I had built. They hadn't even had the decency to tell me themselves. "When does this take effect?" I asked, my voice still unnervingly steady. "It already has," Jake said quietly. "The paperwork was filed this morning. There was a prepared press release, sent out an hour ago, describing the temporary leadership restructuring due to health concerns. Sarah's already changed her LinkedIn profile to COO. A strange calm settled over me. In that moment, I should have been devastated, enraged, broken. Instead, I felt a cool clarity washing through me, as if the shock had cleaned away all emotion and left only crystalline thought. "I see," I said finally. "And the advisory role, what exactly does that entail?" Jake looked miserable. "From what I understand, you'd be consulted on major recipe changes and quality standards, but you'd have no voting power on the board, no operational control, and no financial authority. A consultant in my own company, allowed to offer opinions. That could be easily ignored, stripped of any real power or ownership of my life's work." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me, and for voting no." "Emma, I'm so sorry." Jake's voice broke slightly. "This isn't right. After everything you've built, everything you've done for all of us." "It's not your fault," I said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "But I need you to do something for me." "Anything," he said immediately. "Don't tell them you've told me. Not yet. Let them think I'm still in the dark." He looked confused but nodded. "Okay, but why?" "I need time to think," I said simply. After Jake left, I had perhaps an hour to process what I'd learned before Michael arrived. He came bearing an elaborate flower arrangement, roses and lilies. Flowers I'd told him numerous times triggered my allergies, and a smile that now seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. "You're looking better today," he said, leaning in to kiss my forehead. I fought the urge to turn away. "The doctors are pleased with my progress," I replied neutrally. He settled into the chair Jake had vacated, setting his phone face down on the side table, something he rarely did. He was giving me his full attention. How generous of him. "So," he began, his tone shifting to what I now recognized as his business voice, slightly deeper, more measured. "I wanted to talk to you about some changes we've made at the company." "Temporary changes?" he added quickly. "Just until you're back on your feet." I watched him deliver his practiced speech about how the board had unanimously decided, a lie, that the company needed clear leadership during my absence, how this restructuring was for the best, and how I needed to focus on my health without worries about day-to-day operations. He explained how Sarah was stepping up to help shoulder the burden, and how this would all ensure that the company continued to thrive until I was ready to return. Everything about his delivery, the carefully chosen words, the concerned expressions, the way he held my hand as if offering comfort, told me he had rehearsed this moment. He expected tears, perhaps, maybe anger or hurt. He was prepared to handle my emotional reaction, to soothe and reassure me that this betrayal was actually a gift. "We're doing this for you," he insisted, his eyes searching mine for the response he had anticipated. I looked at him, this man I had loved, had built a life and business with, who had waited until I was literally weakened by heart surgery to take what I had created, and felt nothing but a cool, calculating clarity. "Thank you for letting me know," I said quietly. Relief washed over his face. He squeezed my hand. "I knew you'd understand. This is why I love you. You always see the bigger picture." He stayed another 20 minutes, filling me in on sanitized versions of business developments, carefully avoiding any mention of the national distribution negotiations or the fall menu implementation, the areas where they were likely already making changes I wouldn't approve of. As he prepared to leave, promising to return tomorrow, with some paperwork for you to sign, just formalities for the restructuring, I noticed how much lighter he seemed. The burden of deception lifted. replaced with the satisfaction of having successfully managed a potentially difficult situation. He kissed me goodbye, and I forced myself to smile. "See you tomorrow." When the door closed behind him, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor the only sound in the room. My husband thought he had won. My sister thought she had secured her ambition. My in-laws thought they had finally wrested control from the outsider who had married into their family. They all believed I was too weak, too medicated, too vulnerable to fight back. They all believed wrong. When my sister Sarah visited the next day, she was prepared for tears and anger. Instead, she found me sitting up in bed, reading through some papers. "How are you feeling?" she asked cautiously. "Better every day," I replied, setting the papers aside. "I hear congratulations are in order for your promotion." She faltered, surprised by my composure. "Emma, we only did what was necessary. The doctors said stress could kill you now. We're protecting you." I smiled slightly. "Of course. I appreciate your concern." Sarah left looking unsettled. Good. That night, I made a single phone call to someone they'd all forgotten about. Diane Mercer, my best friend from college, and one of the top business attorneys in Seattle. "Diane, it's Emma. I think I'm about to need your services." What my family didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I hadn't just been creating recipes all these years. I had documented everything, every contribution I'd made, every major decision, every client, relationship I'd built. I had email trails showing my leadership, contracts with my signature, media interviews where I was clearly positioned as the driving force behind our success. And I had one more thing they didn't know about. 6 months earlier, concerned about some financial discrepancies and strange behavior from Michael, I had installed a small recording device in the conference room at headquarters. It was perfectly legal. I had consulted a lawyer first, since I was an owner of the business and had legitimate concerns about potential impropriety. I hadn't checked the recordings in weeks. Now, I asked Jake to bring me the device and the backup files it had been automatically uploading to a secure server. For the remaining week of my hospital stay, I appeared to accept my new advisory role. I told Michael I understood their decision. I asked Sarah to keep me updated on the little things, so I wouldn't feel completely out of touch. They thought I was being reasonable. They didn't realize I was gathering evidence. The recordings were enlightening. Weeks before my surgery, they had been planning this. "Emma's too controlling," Barbara's voice complained in one meeting. "The business will never grow beyond her vision." "She'd never step back voluntarily," Sarah added. "This medical situation might be our only chance to make changes," Michael said. There was more. Discussions of changing recipes to cheaper ingredients. Plans to dilute the brand with frozen products. Strategies to eventually push me out completely by making my position redundant. And the most damning, a recording from 2 days before my removal, where Michael explicitly said, "Once we restructure, we can gradually reduce Emma's ownership percentage by issuing ourselves new shares during the next financing round." I forwarded everything to Diane. "This is better than I expected," she said over the phone. "They've created a clear paper trail of their intentions. Now we need to be strategic about how we use it." 3 days after I was discharged from the hospital, I made my first move. I didn't go after Michael or Sarah directly. Instead, I reached out to our largest distributor, Westlake Foods, who had been negotiating with us for months. Cameron, the purchasing director, had always dealt primarily with me. "Emma, good to hear your voice. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. I understand you've been dealing with my husband and sister during my absence?" A pause. "Yes. And frankly, some of the changes they're proposing to the product specifications are concerning us. The quality parameters they're suggesting aren't what we originally discussed." "That's actually why I'm calling, Cameron. There's been a misunderstanding about the direction of our company. Before you finalize anything, I'd like to meet with you. I didn't tell Michael or Sarah about this meeting. When Cameron subsequently delayed signing their modified agreement, citing ongoing discussions with leadership, they were confused but not yet suspicious. 2 weeks after my discharge, I asked Michael to schedule a full board meeting. "Are you sure you're up for that?" he asked, concerned. "Absolutely. It's time I formally thanked everyone for stepping up during my absence." He looked relieved. "That's really good of you, Emma." On the day of the meeting, I arrived early with Jake. Diane came as my health advocate, which raised eyebrows but no serious objections. I had asked Jake to set up the conference room recording system in case I miss anything important during the meeting. No one questioned that this was the same system that had been recording them all along. Once everyone was seated, Michael, Sarah, Barbara, George, Jake, and Diane, I spoke. "Before we begin, I want to thank you all for making decisions in my absence. I know you believe you were acting in everyone's best interest." Michael smiled, relaxing. "We're just glad you're doing better." "I am," I agreed. "Well enough. In fact, to have thoroughly reviewed those decisions and their context." The atmosphere in the room shifted. "What do you mean, context?" Sarah asked. I nodded to Jake, who connected his laptop to the projector. "I think it's best if you hear it in your own words." For the next 20 minutes, the room filled with their voices plotting against me. Michael's suggestion to use Emma's health crisis to our advantage. Sarah complaining that I was holding the business back with all these quality standards. Barbara's comment that Emma needs to be removed permanently, not just temporarily. The recording of the vote itself was the most damning, clear evidence that the temporary nature of my removal was a lie from the start. When it finished, there was dead silence. "That's illegal," Barbara finally sputtered. "You can't record people without their knowledge." "Actually," Diane spoke for the first time, "as an owner of the business, Emma had every legal right to monitor activities in her company's conference room, especially when she had reasonable suspicion of misconduct, which, as we've just heard, was entirely justified." "What do you want?" Michael asked quietly. I placed a folder on the table. "Diane has prepared several options." The discussion lasted hours. Tears were shed, not by me. Accusations flew, not from me. Throughout it all, I remained calm, clear, and in control. In the end, we reached an agreement. I would return as CEO. Michael would step down from operations entirely, retaining his ownership, but relinquishing decision-making authority. Sarah would remain in marketing, but lose her board seat. Barbara and George would sell their shares back to the company at a fair market rate. "You could have destroyed us all," Sarah said as we concluded. "Why didn't you?" "Because this business is my life's work," I replied. "And despite everything, it's still our family's legacy. I won't let it be destroyed, not by a health crisis, and not by betrayal." The transition back wasn't smooth. Michael moved out of our home 2 weeks later. Sarah and I maintained a professional relationship, but the sisterly bond was broken. Jake became my new COO, his loyalty rewarded with increased responsibility and ownership. Together, we steered the company back to its founding principles: quality, community, and integrity. Within 6 months, we closed the national distribution deal, on our original terms, with no compromise on quality. By the 1-year mark, our revenue had increased by 40%. Michael eventually filed for divorce. I bought out his ownership as part of the settlement. "You know what the ironic thing is?" he said during our final meeting. "If you had actually been the fragile person we thought you were, the company would have failed under our leadership." "I know," I replied. Today, Wilson Bakeries is stronger than ever. We've opened 5 new locations and launched a cookbook featuring the recipes that built our brand. The heart condition that nearly killed me is under control with medication and a slightly less intense work schedule. I sometimes wonder if I could have prevented what happened. If I had shared more, delegated better, or been less driven, would they still have turned against me? But that's the wrong question. The real lesson was learning the difference between trusting people and trusting systems. I now build relationships while also creating accountability. I lead with my heart, but protect with my head. People often ask if I regret installing that recording device. I don't. It wasn't about catching anyone doing something wrong. It was about protecting what I'd built. When you create something meaningful, you have not just a right, but a responsibility to defend it. Sometimes that means preparing for scenarios you hope will never happen. Sometimes it means having difficult conversations before they become impossible ones. If you find yourself betrayed by those you trusted most, remember this. Your greatest strength isn't in your emotional reaction, but in your thoughtful response. Document everything. Know your rights. Build allies based on value and integrity, not just family ties. And remember that your lowest moment, when others think you're at your weakest, just might become the foundation of your greatest comeback. Mine certainly was. When my sister Sarah visited the next afternoon, I could tell she had prepared herself for a confrontation. She arrived clutching a paper bag from our downtown location, blueberry scones, my favorite, and wearing what I'd come to think of as her corporate face, the polished mask she used for difficult client meetings. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek bun, her navy blazer crisp and unwrinkled despite the September humidity. She had come dressed for battle. She seemed visibly thrown when she found me sitting up in bed, calmly reviewing what appeared to be medical paperwork. In reality, I was reading through the hospital's discharge planning documents, but she didn't need to know that. "You look better today," she said, setting the bakery bag on my bedside table with calculated casualness. "I feel stronger," I replied, setting the papers aside and meeting her gaze directly. "The doctors are pleased with my progress." Sarah, perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, her posture unnaturally stiff. She had rehearsed this conversation, I realized. Like Michael, she had prepared for tears, for anger, for hurt accusations. My calm demeanor had disrupted her script before she'd even begun. "So," she started, then cleared her throat. "I guess Michael told you about the temporary changes at the company?" "He did." She waited for me to continue, to question, to protest. When I didn't, she leaned forward slightly. "Emma, we only did what was necessary. The business can't just sit in limbo while you recover." Her voice softened with practiced concern. "The doctors said stress could literally kill you now. This way, you can focus entirely on getting better without worrying about operations." I allowed a small smile to touch my lips. "I appreciate your concern." Her eyebrows drew together slightly, the first crack in her composed expression. "You're not upset?" "Should I be?" I asked mildly. "You've always been ambitious, Sarah, and you've certainly earned a leadership role after all these years." Confusion flickered across her face. This wasn't how she had expected this conversation to go. Her carefully prepared explanations and justifications were useless against simple acceptance. "I just thought you might feel, I don't know, sidelined?" "Temporarily," I reminded her, echoing Michael's assurance, "while I recover." "Right," she said quickly. "Exactly. Temporary." We both knew she was lying. I could see it in the way her gaze slid away from mine, in the slight flush creeping up her neck. Sarah had never been a good liar. It was why she excelled at marketing rather than negotiation. She could present existing truths in the most flattering light, but creating falsehoods from whole cloth had always been beyond her abilities. "Tell me," I said, adjusting my position slightly against the hospital pillows. "How are the national distribution negotiations going? Were you able to maintain our quality standards in the contract?" This was a test. I knew exactly where those negotiations had stood before my hospitalization, and I knew precisely which clauses were non-negotiable from my perspective. Sarah hesitated, just a beat too long. Everything's proceeding according to plan. Don't worry about those details, right? Now, and the fall menu rollout? The maple pecan pastry I was working on before. All this? Another hesitation. We've had to make some adjustments to the timeline, but it's all under control. Translation. They had likely shelved my new creations entirely or handed them off to junior bakers who wouldn't maintain my exacting standards. Good, I said, leaning back against the pillows and closing my eyes briefly, as if tired by our conversation. It sounds like you have everything well in hand. Relief washed over her face. She thought I was surrendering, accepting their takeover with dignified grace. She had no idea I was gathering intelligence, assessing just how far their betrayal had already progressed. We do, she said, confidence returning to her voice. You just focus on getting better. We'll handle everything else. I'm sure you will, I thought, but said only, I'm feeling a bit tired now, Sarah, but thank you for coming by. She stood, seemingly eager to escape now that her mission of managing my reaction had apparently succeeded. At the door, she paused, perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt or sisterly concern. Is there anything you need? Anything I can bring you next time? Actually, I said, keeping my tone light, could you ask Lena to send over the recipe book from my office desk? The handwritten one with the leather cover. I thought I might review some old recipes while I recover, maybe work on some new ideas. Nothing stressful, just creative thinking. Of course, she said, relief evident in her voice at this seeming confirmation that I was accepting my new advisory role. I'll have her drop it off tomorrow. After the door closed behind her, I allowed myself a moment of pure, cold anger. My sister, who had stood beside me for years, who knew better than anyone except perhaps Lena how much of my heart and soul lived in those recipes, had betrayed me without hesitation. For what? A fancier title? More control? The approval of my in-laws? The anger served its purpose, sharpening my resolve. Then I set it aside. Emotions would not help me now. Strategy would. Sarah left looking unsettled despite her relief. Good. Let them all wonder what I was really thinking. Let them mistake my calm for acceptance, my quiet for defeat. That evening, after the nursing staff had completed their final medication rounds and the hospital corridor had grown quiet for the night, I reached for the cell phone Jake had smuggled to me earlier. It wasn't my regular phone, which Michael had conveniently forgotten to bring to the hospital. This was a prepaid phone, basic but functional, purchased by Jake from a convenience store on his way to visit me. Just in case you need to make any calls that aren't logged on your regular phone, he had said quietly, slipping it beneath my pillow. I dialed a number from memory, one I hadn't called in nearly 3 years. After 4 rings, a familiar voice answered, Mercer Legal Group. Diane? It's Emma Wilson. A pause, then warmth flooded her voice. Emma, my God, it's been ages. How are you? Diane Mercer had been my roommate in college years before I met Michael. While I had pursued culinary training, she had gone to law school, eventually specializing in business law with a focus on family-owned companies. She had helped me review our original incorporation documents when Wilson Family Bakeries was just getting started. We had drifted apart as our careers demanded more of our time, but we still exchanged Christmas cards and occasional texts. Actually, I said, keeping my voice low despite the closed door, I think I'm about to need your services. What's going on? Her tone shifted immediately from friendly to professional. Over the next 20 minutes, I outlined everything. My health crisis, the board vote, the leadership restructuring, all of it happening while I was literally at my most vulnerable. Diane listened without interruption, though I could hear her occasionally typing notes. "This is serious, Emma," she said when I finished. "They've essentially performed a hostile takeover while you were incapacitated. There are significant legal and ethical issues here." "I know," I said. "But before we proceed with anything formal, I need information. I need to know exactly what they've done, what they're planning, and what my options are." "That's wise," she agreed. "Acting precipitously could backfire. What's your current physical status? When are you being discharged?" "Hopefully within the week if my blood work continues to improve, but I'll be under orders to rest at home for at least another month after that." "Good. Use that time to gather intelligence while appearing to comply with their new structure. I'll research your company bylaws and board governance rules to identify any procedural violations and how this restructuring was handled." She paused. "Emma, I have to ask, do you have any documentation of conversations or meetings that might substantiate your position? Emails, texts, recorded meetings?" I thought about the small device currently hidden in my office at headquarters, installed months ago when I'd first noticed concerning patterns in Michael's behavior around company finances. "I might," I said carefully, "but I'll need some time to access it." "Understood. For now, play along. Let them think you've accepted this situation. And Emma, document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every interaction. It will all be valuable if we need to build a case." "I will," I promised. "One more thing," Diane added. "Is there anyone at the company you trust completely? Someone who could act as your eyes and ears while you're recovering?" "Jake Reynolds. He was the only board member who voted against this restructuring. He's been with me from the beginning." "Good. Use him, but cautiously. And Emma?" "Yes? I'm sorry this is happening to you. It's a terrible violation of trust. But from what I remember of you, they have significantly underestimated who they're dealing with." After ending the call, I hid the phone in the small bag of personal items kept in my bedside drawer. Then I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling panels illuminated by the dim light from the corridor. What my husband, sister, and in-laws didn't understand, what they had never truly grasped, was that I hadn't built a successful business by accident. Behind my flour-dusted apron and creative passion was a mind that could calculate risks, anticipate threats, and plan multiple steps ahead. They saw only the baker, not the businesswoman. It was perhaps the most fundamental way they had underestimated me, and now that mistake would cost them everything. The next morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, a nurse brought in my breakfast tray along with an unexpected item, a small leather-bound notebook with a card from Lena. "Your sister asked me to send this over. Get better soon. We all miss you. L." My recipe book. I opened it carefully, running my fingers over the familiar pages filled with my handwriting. Measurements adjusted over multiple tests, notes about technique, observations about ingredient interactions. This book contained the heart of our bakery's success, the foundations upon which we had built our reputation. But it contained something else too, something Sarah could never have known about when she so readily agreed to have it delivered to me. Tucked into a small pocket I had created in the back cover were several small SD cards, each labeled with a date. For the past 8 months, concerned about increasingly strange financial patterns and Michael's secretive behavior, I had been backing up significant company documents, contracts, financial reports, email exchanges, onto these tiny storage devices. It had been a precaution, something that had felt almost paranoid at the time. Now it seemed prescient. I removed one of the cards and slipped it into the protective pocket of my hospital gown. The others I returned to their hiding place in the book. This small piece of plastic might contain exactly the leverage I needed to begin reclaiming what was mine. Later that afternoon, when Jake visited bringing fresh fruit and magazines, I discreetly passed him the SD card. I need you to review what's on here, I murmured, making sure the door was fully closed. And I need something else from you, too. His expression was serious, dedicated. Name it. The recording device in my office. Is it still there? Jake's eyebrows rose slightly. As far as I know, no one's touched your office since. Well, since. Good. I need you to retrieve it and the backup files it's been uploading. And Jake, I added, fixing him with a steady gaze, no one can... know you've done this. Not yet. He nodded, understanding the gravity of what I was asking. What exactly are we looking for? Evidence, I said simply, of what they've been planning, what they've already done, and what they intend to do next. As Jake left, promising to return the following day with what I'd requested, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. For the first time since awakening in this hospital bed, I wasn't merely reacting to events beyond my control. I was taking action, however, small. What my family didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that I hadn't just been creating recipes all these years. I had been creating a business, and I had been protecting it, even from threats I hadn't consciously acknowledged yet. They thought they had won. They thought I was broken. They had no idea I was just getting started. The next day brought another visitor, Barbara, my mother-in-law, making her first appearance since my surgery. She arrived carrying an elaborate, floral arrangement of lilies, roses, and chrysanthemums, all flowers I was allergic to, a fact I had mentioned numerous times over the years. Whether this was intentional or merely another indication of how little attention she paid to my preferences, I couldn't be sure. "Emma, darling," she exclaimed, air kissing near my cheek. "You poor thing. How are you feeling?" Barbara Wilson had perfected the art of asking questions without actually caring about the answers. Her concern was performative, a social nicety rather than genuine interest. Over the years, I had learned to respond in kind. "Much better. Thank you, Barbara. How thoughtful of you to visit." She set the flowers on the windowsill and took a seat, crossing her ankles in the proper ladylike fashion she had attempted to instill in me during the early years of my marriage to Michael. Her silver blonde hair was freshly styled, her linen, pants and silk blouse impeccable despite the September humidity outside. "Well, of course I'd visit. Your family." The slight emphasis on family rang hollow, considering her absence until now and her role in voting me out of my position. "Michael has been keeping us updated on your condition, but I wanted to see for myself how you're doing." Translation. She wanted to assess whether I posed any threat to their plans. "It's been a difficult recovery," I admitted, allowing a hint of weakness to color my voice. "The doctors say I need to be extremely careful about stress for the next several months." Barbara nodded, satisfaction flickering briefly in her eyes. Exactly why the board's decision was so necessary. Business concerns are the last thing you need right now. I gave her a small smile. "I'm beginning to understand that." She visibly relaxed, clearly having expected resistance. "I'm so glad. You're being sensible about this, Emma. After all, your health must come first. The company will be there when you're better." "Will it?" I wondered silently. "In what form?" "Michael mentioned that you've taken over my advisory role quite well," I said, watching her carefully. A flash of surprise crossed her face before she controlled it. "Well, yes. Someone needed to oversee quality standards in your absence. And having run a business myself for 30 years, I have some experience to offer." Barbara and George's business experience had consisted of running a moderately successful hardware store in Tacoma, hardly comparable to building a multi-location bakery operation with hundreds of employees and complex supply chains. But I had learned long ago that pointing this out only entrenched her defensiveness. "I'm sure your input has been invaluable," I said instead. "Are you enjoying working with Lena and the other bakers?" Barbara waved a dismissive hand. "Those kitchen details are tedious, frankly. I'm more focused on broader efficiency improvements. Alarm bells rang in my mind. Efficiency improvements? Just some long overdue changes to streamline operations, she said vaguely. Nothing for you to worry about now. I recognize the deflection tactic, having seen Barbara employ it countless times in family discussions. She was hiding something significant. Of course, I agreed, feigning docility. I'm sure you know what's best. After all, you've been wanting to make changes to our operations for years. It was a calculated statement, designed to encourage her to reveal more in a moment of perceived victory. Barbara had never been able to resist the opportunity to gloat. Well, some of your methods were needlessly complicated, she said, warming to the subject. All that fuss about local sourcing and artisanal ingredients. The consumers can't really tell the difference, you know. What matters is consistency and profit margins. I maintained my placid expression with effort. This was exactly what I had feared. They were already dismantling the core principles that had made our bakeries successful. And how are the profit margins looking with these improvements? I asked innocently. Barbara hesitated, perhaps realizing she had said too much. They'll improve once we've fully implemented the changes. These things take time. Translation: sales were already suffering as quality declined, but they were doubling down on their approach. I'm sure you're right, I said, allowing my eyelids to droop slightly. I'm feeling a bit tired now, Barbara. But thank you so much for visiting. She stood, seemingly relieved to exit the conversation. Of course, dear. You rest. Don't worry about a thing. We have everything well in hand. After she left, taking the allergy-inducing flowers with her at my gentle suggestion, I reached for the notebook Jake had brought me yesterday. In it, I had begun documenting every conversation, every revelation, every piece of the puzzle I was slowly assembling. Barbara had just provided several crucial pieces without realizing it. They weren't just taking my position. They were dismantling everything I had built, everything that made our bakeries special. They were corrupting my vision in the name of efficiency and profit margins, not understanding that our success had always been rooted in quality and integrity. But their mistakes were becoming clearer with each interaction. They believed I was defeated because I wasn't fighting back overtly. They thought my calm meant surrender. They had no idea that each placid nod, each docile smile, was concealing a mind growing more focused and determined by the hour. That evening, Jake returned as promised, slipping into my room after most visitors had left for the day. His expression told me he had found something significant. I got the recording device, he said quietly, sitting close to my bed. And you were right to have installed it, Emma. You need to hear what's on these recordings. He handed me a small USB drive. I've transferred the key meetings from the past month. The most important ones are dated and labeled. Tell me, I said, closing my fingers around the drive. Jake ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. They've been planning this for months, Emma, long before your health crisis. They were just waiting for an opportunity. My suspicions confirmed, I felt an odd sense of validation rather than shock. What specifically have they done since taking control? They've already changed suppliers for most of our core ingredients, switching to cheaper alternatives. They've scrapped your fall menu completely and replaced it with items that can be partially pre-made and frozen. They're implementing a new efficiency protocol in all locations that reduces staff hours and preparation time. Each revelation felt like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. And the national distribution deal? Jake's expression darkened. They've agreed to terms that include artificial preservatives to extend shelf life. Everything you explicitly rejected. I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing this betrayal of our core values. When I opened them again, my resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. What about finances? Any unusual movements there? Jake hesitated. Michael has authorized significant bonuses for himself, Sarah, and Barbara as part of the restructuring. And there's something else. They're planning to issue new shares next quarter, which would dilute your ownership percentage while increasing theirs. This was worse than I had imagined. They weren't just pushing me aside temporarily. They were systematically ensuring I could never regain control, even if I fully recovered. "The recordings," I said, tightening my grip on the USB drive. "How damning are they?" "Very," Jake said grimly. "There's one meeting in particular, 3 days before your surgery, where Michael explicitly discusses using your health crisis as leverage to restructure leadership. And another from yesterday where they talk openly about making your removal permanent, despite telling you and the press it's temporary." A cold clarity washed over me. "Thank you, Jake. You're taking a significant risk helping me like this." He shook his head. "No, Emma. After everything you've done for me, everything you've built that gave me a career I love, this is just doing what's right." That night, alone in my hospital room, I listened to the recordings Jake had provided. The voices of my husband, sister, and mother-in-law filled my ears through small earbuds, their words confirming every suspicion and revealing even darker intentions than I had imagined. "Emma's too controlling," Barbara's voice complained in one meeting recorded weeks before my surgery. "The business will never grow beyond her vision." "She'd never step back voluntarily," Sarah added, her voice holding none of the sisterly warmth she showed to my face. "This medical situation might be our only chance to make necessary changes," Michael said. "We need to move quickly while she's unable to interfere." There was more. Discussions of changing recipes to cheaper ingredients, plans to dilute the brand with frozen products, strategies to eventually push me out completely by making my position redundant. And the most damning, a recording from 2 days before my removal, where Michael explicitly said, "Once we restructure, we can gradually reduce Emma's ownership percentage by issuing ourselves new shares during the next financing round. By the time she's fully recovered, it will be too late for her to do anything about it." The calculated coldness of it stunned me. This wasn't an impulsive decision made out of concern for my health or the company's stability. This was a premeditated coup, planned in detail long before my collapse in the test kitchen. I forwarded everything to Diane, using the secure email address she had provided. Her response came within hours. "This is better than I expected," she wrote. "They've created a clear paper trail of their intentions, which contradicts everything they've stated publicly, and to you directly. We have multiple grounds for action here: breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing by board members, fraudulent misrepresentation. But we need to be strategic about how we use this evidence." She outlined several potential approaches, ranging from immediate legal action to a more measured response that would allow us to gather additional evidence while positioning me for a stronger comeback. "The key," she concluded, "is timing. Moving too quickly might alert them to what you know and give them time to cover their tracks. Moving too slowly risks permanent damage to the company and your position within it. I recommend we wait until you're discharged and physically stronger before making any significant moves." I agreed with her assessment. My body was still healing, my energy limited. Confronting them now, from a hospital bed, would put me at a disadvantage. Better to continue my charade of compliance, gathering evidence and strength until the moment was right to strike. For the next 3 days, I maintained my facade of acceptance. When Michael brought paperwork formalizing my temporary move to an advisory role, I signed it without protest, knowing from Diane that the document was largely meaningless, given the evidence of their true intentions and the procedural violations in how the restructuring had been handled. When Sarah visited, bubbling with plans for modernizing our marketing approach, I nodded and offered mild suggestions, all while noticing how she carefully avoided mentioning the customer complaints that were, according to Jake, already flooding our social media channels in response to quality changes. I even took a call from George, Barbara's husband, who awkwardly expressed his hope for my quick recovery while assuring me that the business was evolving nicely in my absence. To all of them, I presented the image they wanted to see: a weakened, compliant woman focused on recovery rather than reclaiming her power. It was perhaps the most challenging role I had ever played, but with each interaction, I gathered more information, more evidence, more ammunition for the battle that was to come. On the 28th day of my hospital stay, Dr. Patel finally delivered the news I had been waiting for. "Your blood work looks good, Emma. The infection has cleared, and your heart function is stable. I think we can discharge you tomorrow, provided you follow a strict recovery regimen at home." "No work stress?" I asked with a small smile. "Absolutely none," she confirmed seriously. "Light physical activity only, regular rest periods. Follow-up? Appointments twice weekly. And you'll need someone to help you at home for at least the first couple of weeks." "My husband will be there," I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the bitter irony of the statement. That evening, I made one final call from the prepaid phone, this time to Lena. I had been cautious about involving her too deeply until now, knowing her position at the bakery could be at risk if Michael or Sarah suspected her loyalty to me. But with my discharge imminent, I needed someone I could trust in my home. "Lena, it's Emma." "Emma!" Her voice filled with genuine warmth. "Jake told me you're coming home tomorrow. That's wonderful news." "Yes, but I'm going to need some help during my recovery. Dr. Patel insists I have someone with me, especially for the first couple of weeks." "Of course," she said immediately. "What do you need?" "Would you be willing to stay with me during the days while Michael is at work? I know it's asking a lot, and it would mean taking time away from the bakery." "I'll do it," she interrupted firmly. "Sarah reassigned me to product development, but she doesn't actually want my input. I have plenty of vacation time saved up." I felt a rush of gratitude for this woman who had stood beside me for years, whose loyalty had never wavered. "Thank you, Lena. There's more happening than you know, and I'm going to need allies I can trust." "I figured as much," she said, her voice dropping. "The changes they're making, Emma, they're destroying everything we built. Customer complaints are up 40% since they switched flour suppliers. The staff is demoralized. Even the new recipes are failing because they've cut prep time and ingredient quality." "I know," I said quietly, "and I'm going to fix it. But first, I need to get stronger." "Then that's what we'll focus on," Lena said with determination. "One step at a time." As I prepared for discharge the next morning, packing the few personal items I had accumulated during my hospital stay, I felt a curious sense of calm. I was heading home to a house I shared with a husband who had betrayed me. I would be recovering under the watchful eyes of people who had tried to take everything from me. I would be pretending weakness while gathering strength. But for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt truly powerful. Because I possessed something they didn't: the truth. And soon, very soon, that truth would change everything. Coming home felt surreal. The house Michael and I had purchased 5 years ago, a craftsman-style home in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood, looked exactly as I had left it nearly a month before. The same potted hydrangeas flanked the front steps, now slightly wilted from neglect. The same brass door knocker gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. The same family photos lined the entryway hall, capturing moments of happiness that now seemed like artifacts from another life. But while the physical structure remained unchanged, everything else had shifted. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like unfamiliar territory, a stage set where I would now perform the most important role of my life. "Home sweet home," Michael said, carrying my small hospital bag through the door. His voice held forced cheerfulness, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I've got the guest bedroom set up downstairs so you won't have to manage the stairs." The guest bedroom. Not our shared master suite upstairs. Already the physical separation had begun. "Thank you," I said, matching his tone with my own performance of grateful wife. "That's thoughtful." He gave me a tour of the preparations he'd made. New sheets on the guest bed, a small side table arranged with my medications, a television, remote within easy reach. All very practical, very considerate. Anyone observing would see only a devoted husband caring for his recovering wife. Only I could see the relief in his eyes at not having to share a bedroom with me. The way he kept, checking his phone for messages from the office, from Sarah, the subtle distance he maintained even while helping me settle in. "Lena will be here tomorrow morning at 8, I told him as I carefully lowered myself onto the guest bed. "She's taking vacation time to help during the days while you're at work." A flicker of unease crossed his face. "Lena? I thought we'd hire a home health aide. Someone professional. Someone without loyalty to me," he meant. "Someone who wouldn't know the details of our business. Dr. Patel suggested someone familiar would be better for my emotional recovery," I lied smoothly. "Less stressful than explaining everything to a stranger." He couldn't argue with medical advice, not when he'd used my health as the justification for their takeover. "If you think that's best," he conceded. "I suppose Lena could use a break from the bakery anyway. Things are transitioning there." "I bet they are," I thought, but kept my expression neutral. "I'm sure Sarah is keeping her busy with the new product development role." Michael looked surprised. "How did you know about that?" "Sarah mentioned it during one of her visits," I said, which was technically true. She had referenced adjustments to the team structure without specifics. He seemed to accept this, though a hint of suspicion lingered in his eyes. "Right. Well, she thought Lena's talents would be better utilized in development rather than day-to-day production." Translation: Sarah had sidelined Lena, knowing her. Loyalty to me and my vision would make her resistant to their changes. "Makes sense," I agreed mildly. "Lena has always had good ideas for new products." Michael nodded, then glanced at his watch. "I should get you settled and then head into the office for a few hours. There's a strategy meeting at 4 that I shouldn't miss." "Of course," I said. "I'll probably just rest this afternoon anyway." He helped me arrange pillows against the headboard, brought me water and a light lunch, showed me how he'd programmed the television remote with all my favorite channels. The perfect attentive husband. Anyone watching would have been moved by his devotion. When he finally left, the silence in the house felt like a physical presence. I allowed myself a full minute to close my eyes and breathe, to acknowledge the strange grief of being a stranger in my own home, married to a man who had become my enemy. Then I got to work. First, I retrieved my tablet from the bedside drawer where Michael had placed it. He had helpfully removed all my email and messaging apps, claiming Dr. Patel had recommended limiting stress-inducing communications. Instead, I found mindfulness applications, ebooks, and streaming services, entertainment suitable for an invalid. What Michael didn't know was that I had a second tablet, one he had never seen, stored in a lockbox in my home office closet. Jake had retrieved it from the office yesterday and hidden it in the linen closet near the guest bedroom during his brief visit to check on the house before my discharge. I waited until Michael's car had been gone for 15 minutes, then carefully made my way to the linen closet. Behind a stack of guest towels was the slim device, still in its protective case. I brought it back to bed, powered it on, and connected to our home network using the password Michael didn't know I had changed 6 months ago. This tablet contained everything I needed: secure messaging apps, financial tracking software, and most importantly, direct access to the cloud storage, where Jake had been backing up the recordings from my office device. For the next 2 hours, I immersed myself in evidence. The recordings were even more damning when heard in sequence. A clear narrative of conspiracy and betrayal that had begun not after my health crisis, but months before. The changes they had implemented since taking control were exactly what I had feared. Cheaper ingredients, reduced quality standards, staff cuts disguised as efficiency measures, and a complete disregard for the core values that had built our brand. Most troubling were the conversations about future plans. They intended to expand rapidly, opening 20 new locations in the next year using a franchising model I had always resisted. They were exploring co-branding opportunities with a national coffee chain, which would fundamentally alter our identity as an artisanal bakery. And they were seriously considering a buyout offer from a regional competitor, something that would never have been on the table under my leadership. They were dismantling everything I had built, piece by piece, and they were doing it with calculated precision. I forwarded the most damning recordings to Diane, along with my analysis of how each action violated our company bylaws, board governance rules, or my legal rights as a founding partner. Then I carefully hid the tablet back in the linen closet and returned to bed, feigning sleep when Michael returned home hours later. As he moved around the house, making dinner sounds in the kitchen, I thought about what I had discovered. My husband and sister believed they were executing a brilliant strategic takeover. But in reality, they had made a fundamental error. They had assumed my strength came solely from my position in the company, from my title and operational authority. They didn't understand that my true power had always resided in knowledge. Knowledge of our products, our customers, our staff, and most crucially, knowledge of them. I knew Michael valued appearance over substance, status over integrity. I knew Sarah's ambition often clouded her judgment. I knew Barbara's resentment of me had poisoned her ability to see what actually made our business successful. And now, I knew their plans. Every detail, every strategy, every weakness. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was what I had been doing behind the scenes all these years. It wasn't just recipes I had been developing. The following morning, Lena arrived promptly at 8, letting herself in. With the spare key she had always possessed as our head baker, I heard her quiet conversation with Michael in the kitchen, his instructions about my medication schedule, his assurance that he would check in throughout the day. When he finally left for the office, Lena appeared in the guest bedroom doorway, a steaming mug of properly brewed Earl Grey tea in one hand and a small bag from our flagship bakery in the other. "I thought you might be tired of hospital food," she said, setting the bag on the bedside table. Inside was a perfect chocolate croissant, my own recipe, executed with the precision and care I had always insisted upon. "You made this yourself, didn't you?" I asked, recognizing the distinctive lamination pattern of the pastry. Lena nodded, settling into the chair beside the bed. "Had to come in at 5 this morning before anyone else arrived. Sarah's new head baker doesn't believe in taking the time to let the dough rest properly between folds." I closed my eyes briefly at this confirmation of quality degradation. "How bad is it, really?" Lena's expression darkened. "Bad, Emma. They've switched to pre-mixed bases for most of the quick breads. They're using frozen fruit in everything except the showcase items. The sourdough starter that you've maintained for a decade? They're supplementing it with commercial yeast to speed up production." Each revelation felt like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral, encouraging her to continue. "The staff is miserable. Those efficiency protocols they've implemented have cut everyone's hours and doubled workloads. 3 of our best bakers have already quit, and customers are noticing. Complaints are up, sales are down at most locations, except for downtown where tourist traffic keeps numbers steady. And the fall menu rollout? Canceled. Sarah says it's too complicated and labor-intensive. They're doing a simplified menu with items that can be partially prepared off-site and finished in-store." Exactly as I had feared. They weren't just changing leadership, they were fundamentally altering the business model that had made us successful. "What about the national distribution deal? Have they finalized it?" Lena hesitated. "They're close. But Emma, the terms. They've agreed to use preservatives and dough conditioners to extend shelf life. Everything you specifically refused. I nodded slowly, processing this information. And Michael? How is he handling all this? He's rarely in the actual bakeries anymore. He's spending most of his time in executive meetings with Sarah and Barbara, or in discussions with potential investors. There's talk of taking on significant debt to fund the expansion plans. Debt? This was new information. Michael and I had always been conservative with financing, preferring slow, sustainable growth to rapid expansion funded by loans. Apparently, Barbara knows someone at First National who's offering very favorable terms. Lena's tone made it clear what she thought of this development. I took a sip of tea, using the moment to organize my thoughts. Thank you, Lena. I know. Asking you to spy on your colleagues isn't comfortable. She straightened in her chair. They're not my colleagues, Emma. They're people destroying something I helped build. Something I believe in. Her voice softened. How are you really doing? And what's our next move? I smiled at her use of our. In Lena, I had not just an employee or friend, but a true ally who understood what was at stake. I'm getting stronger every day, I assured her. And as for our next move, I'm gathering evidence, building a case. I've engaged legal counsel, and I'm developing a strategy to reclaim what's mine. Lena leaned forward, eyes narrowing. What can I do to help? Continue being my eyes and ears at the bakeries. Document everything, quality changes, staff, issues, customer complaints, and most importantly, maintain the facade that I'm complying with this new arrangement. She nodded, determination evident in her posture. Consider it done. Anything else? I hesitated, then decided to trust her completely. There is one more thing. In my home office, behind the botanical print on the east wall, there's a small safe. The combination is Helen's birthday, my grandmother. I gave her the numbers. Inside, you'll find a USB drive labeled Contingency. I need you to retrieve it without Michael knowing. Lena didn't ask what was on the drive. She simply nodded and rose from her chair. I'll check your office while getting fresh towels for the bathroom. Perfectly natural thing for a caretaker to do. 20 minutes later, she returned with the USB drive discreetly tucked into her pocket. Once the door was closed, she handed it to me. Thank you, I said, closing my fingers around the small device that contained perhaps my most valuable insurance policy. 6 months earlier, concerned about some troubling patterns in our financial reporting and Michael's increasingly secretive behavior, I had consulted privately with a forensic accountant. He had reviewed our books and discovered several concerning irregularities, questionable expense allocations, unusual cash withdrawals, and discrepancies between reported inventory costs and actual vendor invoices. Nothing explicitly illegal, but enough to indicate that Michael had been manipulating financial reports, possibly to hide his own excessive compensation or to make certain business units look more profitable than they actually were. I had documented everything, intending to confront Michael when I had a complete picture. Then my health had deteriorated, and that confrontation never happened. Instead, the evidence had sat waiting in my safe, until now. I connected the drive to my hidden tablet and confirmed the files were intact. Then, I forwarded everything to Diane with a brief explanation. Her response came within hours. This changes our strategy completely. Financial misconduct by the CEO gives us significant leverage. Let me analyze the full implications and develop an action plan. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Michael would leave for work early, Lena would arrive to care for me, and I would spend the day gathering intelligence, communicating with Diane, and gradually building my strength through the gentle exercise program Dr. Patel had prescribed. To Michael, I presented the image of a compliant, recovering invalid, grateful for his care and uninterested in business matters. I accepted the bland, healthy meals he prepared. I thanked him for handling everything so I could focus on healing. I listened with apparent indifference when he mentioned changes at the bakeries, offering only mild suggestions that he could easily dismiss. The customers will adjust to the new recipes, he assured me when I gently questioned the wisdom of changing our signature sourdough formula. Change is always met with some resistance, but the profit margins are already improving. I nodded and changed the subject to something inconsequential, watching as relief washed over his face. He believed I was accepting my new reality, too focused on recovery to fight for my company. Meanwhile, Jake continued to feed me information from board meetings and executive sessions. Lena provided daily reports on operations and staff morale, and Diane worked diligently to build our legal strategy. By the end of my first week at home, we had accumulated a mountain of evidence documenting not just the coup itself, but the subsequent mismanagement that was already damaging the business. Most crucially, we had established clear violations of fiduciary duty by Michael, Sarah, and Barbara, who had acted in their own interests rather than for the benefit of the company and all its shareholders. "We're almost ready," Diane told me, during one of our secure calls. "But there's one piece still missing: direct evidence connecting Michael's financial manipulations to this leadership restructuring. Something that proves he orchestrated this takeover not just to control the company, but potentially to hide his previous financial misconduct." I thought about this gap in our case. The recording device in the conference room wouldn't capture private conversations in his office. Exactly. We need something more personal. Something from Michael himself that reveals his true motivations. The opportunity presented itself unexpectedly the following evening. Michael arrived home late, looking tense and preoccupied. He checked on me briefly, then retreated to his home office upstairs, closing the door firmly behind him. Minutes later, I heard his raised voice, though the words were indistinct. He was arguing with someone on the phone, something that rarely happened with the always composed, always in control Michael Wilson. Moving carefully to avoid aggravating my still healing chest, I made my way to the bottom of the stairs. From there, fragments of Michael's conversation drifted down. Unavoidable complications. Yes, I know what I promised. The auditors won't find anything if you just... No, Emma suspects nothing. We'll have everything resolved before she's well enough to... My pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of evidence we needed, but I had no way to record it from my position at the foot of the stairs. Then I remembered something: the home security system Michael had insisted on installing last year. It included interior cameras in the hallways and common areas, ostensibly for safety, but primarily for Michael's peace of mind when traveling. Those cameras had audio capability, and all footage was backed up to a cloud server that both of us could access. I retreated quietly to the guest bedroom and retrieved my hidden tablet. Logging into the security system required Michael's password, which I had discreetly obtained months ago but never had reason to use. The system showed 6 active cameras in the house. None were in private rooms like bedrooms or bathrooms, but one covered the upstairs hallway outside Michael's office. If his door was open even slightly, the camera might pick up his conversation. I selected that camera and was rewarded with a clear view of the hallway. Michael's office door was indeed partially open, and his agitated voice was being captured by the hallway microphone. The financial restructuring has to happen now, before the year-end audit. Yes, I know it's aggressive, but with Emma sidelined, we have a perfect opportunity to... I quickly enabled the recording function, my heart racing. This was exactly what Diane had said we needed: direct evidence linking the takeover to financial misconduct. For the next 17 minutes, I listened as my husband revealed the true extent of his betrayal. He had been systematically misreporting company finances for at least 2 years, creating a reserve fund that he controlled personally rather than through proper company channels. The recent leadership coup wasn't just about control, it was about preventing me from discovering these financial irregularities during our upcoming annual audit. Most damning of all, he explicitly mentioned using my health crisis as the perfect cover for implementing changes that would obscure his previous actions. By the time she's well enough to ask questions, he told the person on the other end of the call, the paper trail will be clean, and the new organizational structure will make it impossible for her to access the original records. When the call finally ended, I stopped the recording and immediately sent it to Diane with a brief explanation. Then I carefully made my way back to the guest bedroom, my mind racing with implications, but my body suddenly exhausted from the tension and activity. Michael appeared in my doorway 30 minutes later, his composure fully restored. "How are you feeling? Need anything before I turn in?" I looked at this man, my husband of 12 years, my business partner, the person I had trusted most in the world, and felt a curious detachment. In his calculating eyes, I no longer saw a betrayer who could hurt me. I saw merely an opponent who had severely underestimated his adversary. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "Just tired." He nodded, already turning away. "Get some rest. Lena said your follow-up appointment with Dr. Patel is tomorrow at 11. I've got meetings all day, so she'll take you." "Thank you," I said. "Good night, Michael." As his footsteps retreated up the stairs, I smiled slightly to myself. Let him sleep peacefully tonight, secure in his belief that his schemes were progressing perfectly. Tomorrow would bring developments he couldn't possibly anticipate. Diane called early the next morning, before Michael had even left for work. I took the call in the bathroom with the shower running, a precaution that probably wasn't necessary but felt prudent. "That recording is exactly what we needed," she said without preamble. "It establishes clear intent to use your medical condition as cover for financial misconduct. Combined with everything else we've gathered, we have an airtight case against Michael, and by extension, against the entire board's actions." "So, what's our next move?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "I've prepared legal documents to reverse the leadership restructuring and initiate an emergency board meeting. I've also drafted a formal complaint to be filed with the SEC regarding the financial improprieties. But before we go nuclear, I think we should give Michael and the others one chance to resolve this privately." I considered this. A public legal battle would damage the company, potentially beyond repair. Customer confidence would be shaken, staff morale would plummet even further, and our competitors would exploit the chaos. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "A meeting. You, Michael, Sarah, Barbara, and Jake, with me present as your legal counsel. We present a portion of our evidence, enough to make the severity of the situation clear without revealing all our cards. We offer terms for a peaceful resolution. Your reinstatement as CEO, their resignation from operational roles, and a third-party audit of all financial records. And if they refuse, then we file everything: the SEC complaint, the lawsuit, against the board, the injunction to freeze company assets pending investigation. It would be mutually assured destruction, but they would come out far worse than you." I thought about it carefully. A negotiated resolution would be better for the company, for our employees, and for the brand I had spent a decade building. But it would require Michael, Sarah, and Barbara to recognize the strength of my position, something their arrogance might prevent. "Let's do it," I decided. "Set up the meeting for tomorrow afternoon. I'll be ready." After ending the call, I sent a text to Lena canceling our plans for the day. My follow-up appointment with Dr. Patel could wait. I had more important preparations to make. Throughout the day, I reviewed all the evidence we had gathered, organizing it into a compelling narrative of betrayal, misconduct, and corporate malfeasance. I practiced what I would say, how I would present myself, how I would respond to their inevitable attempts to dismiss or minimize the seriousness of the situation. Most importantly, I worked to master my emotions. This confrontation couldn't be fueled by hurt or anger, no matter how justified those feelings might be. It needed to be driven by clear-eyed strategy and unassailable facts. By evening, when Michael returned home. I felt completely prepared. He noticed something different immediately. A shift in my energy, perhaps, or a subtle change in how I carried myself. "You seem better today," he observed cautiously. "More alert." I'm feeling stronger," I agreed. "In fact, I think I'm ready to start discussing my return to the company." A flicker of alarm crossed his face before he controlled it. "That's good to hear. But Dr. Patel was very clear about your recovery timeline. It's only been a couple of weeks since your discharge." "True," I acknowledged. "But I've been thinking about potential ways to ease back in. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting with the board to discuss options." Michael set down the glass of water he had been holding, his knuckles whitening slightly. "There's no rush. Emma, everything is running smoothly. Your health has to be the priority." I smiled gently. "Of course, but I think a brief meeting would actually help my recovery. Give me some peace of mind about the business." He hesitated, clearly trying to formulate a reason to refuse that wouldn't contradict his purported concern for my well-being. "Let me talk to Sarah and the others first. See what makes sense for everyone's schedules." "Actually," I said, maintaining my pleasant tone, "I've already reached out to them. We're all set for tomorrow afternoon at 3, here at the house, so I don't have to travel to headquarters." The color drained from Michael's face. "You've been in contact with the board? When? How?" I shrugged slightly. "I may be recovering, Michael, but I'm still a board member. I have every right to call a meeting." He stared at me, reassessing, perhaps seeing for the first time that the compliant invalid he had been managing for weeks was a carefully crafted illusion. "What exactly is this meeting about, Emma?" His voice had taken on a harder edge. I met his gaze directly, dropping all pretense of fragility. "It's about the future of our company. My company. The one you, my sister, and your mother attempted to steal while I was fighting for my life." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's expression shifted from shock to calculation to a carefully composed, neutral mask. "I think you're confused," he said finally, his tone patronizing. "The restructuring was necessary and temporary. No one was stealing anything from you." "Save it for the meeting, Michael," I replied calmly. "You'll want to conserve your energy for tomorrow. It's going to be illuminating." He left the room without another word, and I heard him on the phone moments later, his voice too low to distinguish words, but his urgent tone unmistakable. He was warning the others, no doubt, trying to develop a united front against whatever he thought I might know. Let them conspire, I thought. Let them strategize and plan their defenses. They had no idea what was coming. That night, as I lay in the guest bedroom listening to Michael pace the floor above me, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. Tomorrow would be difficult, confrontational, perhaps even ugly, but it would also be the beginning of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. They had thought me weak, vulnerable, easily pushed aside. They had underestimated my foresight, my determination, and my capacity for strategic thinking. Most fatally, they had mistaken my calm for acceptance, my patience for defeat. Tomorrow they would learn the truth, that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is not the one who shouts and threatens, but the one who watches, waits, and strikes when the moment is perfect. And my moment had finally arrived. The morning of the board meeting arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt since before my surgery. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but not intimidating, a navy dress that conveyed authority while the slight pallor of my complexion reminded everyone of what I'd endured. Michael hovered anxiously as I prepared, clearly unsettled by my newfound confidence. "Emma, I still think this is premature. Your recovery is progressing well," I finished. For him. "Let's not pretend this meeting is about my health, Michael." By 3 o'clock, our living room had transformed into an impromptu boardroom. Jake arrived first, followed by Diane Mercer, my attorney and college friend. When the doorbell rang, again, I answered it myself, taking quiet satisfaction in Sarah and Barbara's shocked expressions as they registered Diane's presence. "What is this?" Barbara demanded, her voice brittle with poorly concealed anxiety. "Please, sit down," I said calmly. "We have important matters to discuss." Once everyone was seated, I began without preamble. 4 weeks ago, while I was unconscious, following heart surgery, you voted to remove me from leadership of my own company. You claimed it was temporary and necessary for my health. I paused, meeting each of their eyes in turn. That was a lie. The silence that followed was absolute. I removed a small device from my pocket and pressed play. Michael's voice filled the room. "Emma's medical situation is the perfect opportunity to restructure. Once we've established the new leadership, we can gradually reduce her ownership through the next financing round." Color drained from Michael's. Acro, Sarah stared at her hands. Only Barbara attempted defense. "You've been recording private conversations? That's completely legal," Diane interjected smoothly. Emma had legitimate concerns about company operations and installed recording devices in company property, namely, the headquarters conference room. I continued, my voice steady. "I have documented every quality standard you've compromised, every loyal employee you've mistreated, every financial irregularity Michael has attempted to hide." I nodded to Jake, who distributed folders containing meticulously organized evidence. "The customers are noticing. Complaints are up 40%. Staff morale has collapsed, and the financial mismanagement would interest the SEC considerably." Michael finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" "What's rightfully mine," I replied simply. "Effective immediately, I will be reinstated as CEO. Michael will resign from all operational roles but may maintain his ownership stake pending a financial audit. Sarah returns to marketing with clearly defined limitations. Barbara and George will sell their shares back to the company and remove themselves from the board." "This is absurd," Barbara sputtered. "Your alternative," I continued as if she hadn't spoken, "is that tomorrow morning we file formal complaints with the SEC regarding financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. We simultaneously release all recordings and evidence to major business publications. Your careers, reputations, and possibly your freedom would be forfeit." The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical presence. "You would destroy everything." "We've built?" Sarah asked incredulously. "Everything you've built?" "I don't want to," I acknowledged. "That's why I'm offering this private resolution first. But I will not allow you to keep what you stole from me." I stood then, signaling the end of discussion. "You have until 9 tomorrow morning to accept these terms. Until then, this meeting is adjourned." One by one, they left. Barbara first, then Sarah, both avoiding my gaze. Michael lingered, looking suddenly older. "Emma," he began, his voice breaking slightly. "We can work through this. As a couple, I mean." "No, Michael," I interrupted gently. "We can't. You saw my health crisis as an opportunity to take what wasn't yours. That's not something we can come back from." After they left, Diane squeezed my hand. "That was masterfully handled. What happens now?" "Now we wait," I replied, "but not for long." I was right. By 8 o'clock the next morning, their lawyer, a family friend of the Wilsons who looked thoroughly uncomfortable with the situation, contacted Diane accepting all terms. The paperwork was signed that afternoon in Diane's office downtown. As Barbara signed the final document transferring her shares, she couldn't resist one parting shot. "I hope you're satisfied. You've torn this family apart." I met her gaze, steadily. "No, Barbara. You did that when you chose greed over loyalty." Michael was the last to leave. What will you tell people about us? The truth, I said simply. That some partnerships, business and personal, aren't meant to last. That's all anyone outside this room needs to know. The work of restoration began immediately. From temporary headquarters in my home, I reversed the quality compromises, reconnected with original suppliers, and personally called key staff members who had been considering leaving. Lena and Jake served as my eyes and ears until I was strong enough to return full-time. It's like watching a wilted plant being watered. Lena observed 3 weeks later as we reviewed reports. Everyone is standing taller, working with more care, smiling again. By the 6-month mark, our customer complaints had returned to historical lows. The financial audit revealed the full extent of Michael's manipulations, allowing me to address previously hidden weaknesses. Sarah eventually resigned to take a position in Seattle. Michael and I divorced quietly, his ownership stake remaining, but his influence entirely removed. 1 year after my surgery, I stood in our test kitchen, hands dusted with flour as I perfected a new seasonal pastry. The rhythmic process of folding butter into dough gave me space to reflect on all that had happened. I had lost my husband and distanced myself from my sister. I had endured betrayal and fought for what was mine while still physically vulnerable. But I had also discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed and identified allies whose loyalty transcended convenience. Most importantly, I had learned that true power doesn't come from titles or authority. It comes from preparation, from documentation, from keeping your eyes open even when the truth is painful. It comes from knowing when to fight openly and when to gather evidence quietly. As I shaped the dough with practiced hands, I smiled at the wisdom my grandmother had shared decades ago. Baking isn't just about following recipes. It's about patience, about knowing when to work the dough and when to let it rest. She had been right about so much more than bread. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.